All right. Looks like I'm back. Hi, everyone. So, for our next panel, we are going to demystify KVM over IP. So, we're just going to tell you what you need to know for the next 30 minutes. So, joining me is Jason Jacoby and Jim Trudell. Hi, guys. Welcome.
Hello.
Hey there. Great to be here.
So, first things first, I will ask both of you to just talk about yourselves and what you do a little bit. Jason, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll talk about myself. My name is Jason Jacoby. My pronouns are they, them. If you call me he, I don't care. I work for Diversified as a sales engineer, um, which basically means I assist our awesome account executives in their designs, creating scope of works and bill of materials. I've been around the industry for way too long a time in integration for over the past decade. Uh, Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I'm Jim Trudell. I'm with McCann Systems, senior system design engineer. I do a lot of pre-sales and some post-sales engineering. We're pretty customer focused, so a lot of what we do is get involved with the customer and stay with them through the project. And so my goal is here to McCann to through inception to completion, right? We do everything, but been doing AV and I didn't know it for most of my life because I didn't know what AV was. But commercial AV about 10 years. I was previously with some other integrators and done all the jobs from service technician to field engineering. So a lot of field work, technical work, stuff like that.
Very cool. So let's kind of start big picture here, and I'm just going to ask questions, and whoever just wants to jump in first can. I'm a very chaotic panel host, I guess. So for those who might be new to the concept, how would each slash either of you describe or explain what KVM over IP technology is?
Jim and I kind of discussed this a little bit before the call, and KVM over IP is really not one of those like blurts out of the tongue things you talk about, like
Yeah.
microphone or something like that with AV. It's not very sexy, right? It's very utilitarian,
Right.
and I think the best way to describe KVM over IP is to look at in the title of it itself. It says it what it is right there in front of you. And the trick is to understand how to apply that to your situation and understand when you need to apply that to your installation. And Jim, if you want to continue
Yeah.
with
Yeah, I mean, KVM is keyboard, video, mouse, and it's always been that way. And now it's over IP because that's what we do. We put it on a network. So in the simplest terms, you're taking keyboard, video, mouse, transporting that over a network so that the user can virtually sit in front of a computer of some kind, any computer. And now we're not doing KVM in the room. That's how it used to be. You're doing KVM anywhere you've got a network jack, essentially.
So, what are the benefits to doing this for those of us who are in the AV industry?
I think, I thought a lot about that. And I think looking at how I've deployed it and how I've seen it deployed is the systems are getting more and more complex. You have more and more things that are computer based. You have to locate these computers somewhere, and they may not be Windows, they may not be Mac. I'm seeing Linux pop up more and more. So you've got multiple types of PCs. They've got to live somewhere, and a person or people have to be able to get access to them from different places. So I've got scenarios where PCs are living in a control room or in a rack closet, and they're used for presentation, or they're used to manage the microphone system because they've got delegate microphones and they need a computer to do that. It's a lot easier when anyone with a workstation can get to those devices. So I think it sort of became a necessity. I think it's one of those things that wasn't a product looking for a solution. It was a solution. It was a problem that needed a solution, right?
Yeah.
So it's become important in a lot of scenarios.
I mean, that's kind of how some of the best things in our industry and outside of our industry are born, right? Just from a problem that needed solving. Um, but okay, so at the end of the day, it's kind of going to enhance that remote access and centralized management? How does it do that?
So it depends. Great AV answer, by the way. It depends. But
Yep.
on that use case and what remote is, right? Local is next to the machine. Remote can be anywhere else. And are you looking at controlling many machines from one location? Or are you looking at a single machine from many locations? So a KVM over IP can work both ways. And also with that remote participant or the remote control, you can also have a supervisor role that could technically come in from outside of it, where you might not be on a local area network or a wide area, but you know, it might be somebody who's out somewhere else who wants to check in. So there are many different ways to look at that. And it's important to understand the client requirements up front. I come from a project management background, so I'm more about the requirements side always, and establishing that up front, where what are the requirements for your installation? How do we look into that? And then finding the right product in the right place.
Okay, so next question. Do y'all want to talk about specific features or functionalities that have like really improved operational efficiency and like how this has helped done that or helped do that?
I think looking a little bit at hardware, many of these systems will power over Ethernet now, and I think that when you've got 30 computers in a rack and you also now have to have 30 devices to encode them into a KVM network, being able to do that over PoE allows you to manage the power at one location, which would be a switch, monitor it, and remotely reboot them and things like that. So that's a really cool feature that wasn't available in the earlier KVM over IP solutions. And there's a whole, that could go into a whole nother topic of things on the network, but I think you're seeing more and more things go PoE, and it's not a bad thing. You have so many power, scenarios that you have to deal with. So that's huge for me. And I always look for things that can do that. And then it's keyboard, video, mouse, but a lot of them do other things. And one of them that I took advantage of on a design was audio. A lot of them can transport audio. And so I had a emergency ops center where they were viewing PCs over a KVM network, and they would do audible alerts. And so we were able to bring the audible alerts over the network into the monitors, and we didn't have to do a separate audio system. So it's a huge benefit if you can do audio over a KVM and you need to be able to hear system alerts or software alerts, or even, media. Sometimes you need to get media over the network. So those are huge and not something that was included in earlier KVM for servers. Servers don't do audio, but we do. It's in AV, right? So it's huge.
I think also the standardization in digital video outputs, where, not many years ago, we used to have analog video still and digital video, and now we're really starting to establish that it's most likely going to be a display port out of that computer or a USB-C or something of that nature, potentially not even an HDMI anymore, right? It's kind of moving beyond that even. So really standardizing that and making sure there aren't many pieces in between, because one of my first KVM over IP experiences, it was all about dongles and just how do I get from one video source out to the monitors and back the other way, and planning that on each station, knowing that for each computer, it took a spreadsheet and took a chart to really put it down. So it's nice to see more of a standardization, although some of the connectors are a little tricky if you haven't gotten into USB-C yet. So
yep, and then that'll be coming up later today in the conversation. So coming soon. So it also offers like this extra sense of scalability. So you guys want to talk about that too, because scalability is almost like a buzzword in our industry now. Like everyone loves to say something's scalable. So do you want to talk about that a little bit too?
Sure. Scalability, we talked about a little bit earlier, where scalability can extend even to somebody coming in from the outside.
Right.
But in the room itself, I was involved with a federal project that had 150 user stations. I mean, that's a really large control room that people are getting into, and they're all accessing. And I think the way it scales is important too. Where we're talking about people, especially in a control room in a mission critical environment, they can't have dropouts when they're trying to access a station. So it's important with these products that that scalability also brings the redundancy with it, also brings the just the hardness almost of it. Like it's strengthened. So you're not just adding a user, you're adding user credentials, you're adding a different login potentially for that user. So there's different areas of how it scales. But yeah, you can go from 1-to-1 to 1-to-2, but now we're also looking at 1-to-hundreds or
Yeah.
100-to-1 kind of situation. And IP really enables that easier. I heard it mentioned on a previous session where we're not dealing with a backplane size of a matrix, because KVM also used to go through matrix where you need a certain set amount of slots. And now over IP, as long as you have that bandwidth, as long as you have the network configuration that you're looking for, you're able to truly scale it to a larger size.
I think that's huge. That was a thought I had too, which is if you bought a 32 slot KVM and you needed 33, now you have to buy a bigger KVM system. With an over IP solution, it's just another device gets paired. Now you're 33-to-3 or 4 or whatever your users are. So that seems to be true with many over IP things, which
Mhm.
was like a benefit no one saw coming, but now you can actually have disparaging IO sizes. You don't have to buy what you need forever all at once,
100%. So, how do you both see this technology? Or, I mean, it definitely could shift to be something that no one saw coming. That's often how this goes in our industry. But how do you see this evolving to meet the demands that we're starting to see now in the future of AV?
I think that I don't know a ton of products that do this, but I'm seeing a lot of things get virtualized.
Mm-hmm.
Control platforms, audio DSPs getting virtualized. I'd love to see KVM over IP solutions that's maybe start hybrid. They have virtualized. I'm going to use the word encoder, maybe, right? They have a virtualized way to get things onto the KVM network with a way to get physical things, and they're all accessed the same way. So maybe you've got a server that's got virtualized control processors in it. And you need to get into them to manage that. I know there are some enterprise IT solutions that do that, but there's not a lot that's AV centric. So that's something that I'd like to see. And I think it's going to happen, right? Because it's going to be a necessity, and someone's going to come up with a product that does a hybrid solution. And I think a lot of MTRs and Zoom rooms and things like that are going to need to be managed in large systems. So not your typical conference room. KVM is going to be a way you can get into those devices through front end management. You're not restricted to just what the web UI or whatnot is going to give you. You can actually go and manage those computes. So that's something that maybe could be built into the platform. I don't know, but it's an idea.
I think a lot of it that I see it as well, as I said in the beginning, this is really a utilitarian product. Like the biggest question I always have with KVM over IP when I started with it is why? We do video over IP, why? And we do USB over IP. Why do I need this solution? So it's really keeping it in mind that it's there for a reason, and that reason could be different than your conference room and your typical use case. So understanding that use case, but in that use case also looking at it from, does this KVM support multiple monitors, where
Right.
if I have a dual display system, can I easily go back and forth between the two displays with my mouse? I mean, that became a huge issue that we had when we were doing it with a control desk inside of a production space, is that we needed the dual monitors. So just even the little features and making sure that you're having that discussion again on that front end with the user, making sure you're understanding the use case and that the product fits that. And as the products move forward, the support from the manufacturers, because manufacturers come into play here. I got an email this morning from one of the big KVM over IP manufacturers that you have to update your firmware or it's not going to be supported anymore. So just making sure you maintain that relationship with the manufacturer, with the integrator, and as you move forward with the product.
So, with any networked system, there are always going to be questions about security. So, What measures should be taken at the very least to protect your KVM over IP systems? Like, even if you're just getting into that, which like you shouldn't be, but let's just say that you are.
I think choosing a platform that is security based, and most of the major manufacturers are going to understand they're playing in an IT space here. And so enterprise grade encryption, AES 256, RSA 2048, making sure things are end to end password protected, managing user access on the actual computers that you are interfacing with. So you don't want to just have computers just logged in waiting to be accessed. They should be, the KVM solution should be protected, but also the devices that you're going to be accessing you should get to that and then hit another login. And that's a good opportunity for single sign-on and domain protection and all the standard things that you'd expect on a computer in an enterprise environment. And then if you're in environments that are extremely secure, KVM over IP can be air gapped, and it's a good solution. Now you've got a dedicated switch that's just, if you don't need to get out of the building, it's just the KVM to access those computers, and those computers live on the secure network that the client is controlling. You're not converging the two. I don't think that's the goal, but it saves you from being in the same room with the computers. So I think that's probably an extreme scenario. But encryption and single sign-on, that's where we live now. We gotta embrace that.
Yeah, I think the key with security is having multiple levels. Don't rely on just one method, where you mentioned the air gap. That's one method, right? But then also on the network, you want to make sure you have your sign-ons and your security enabled there. So make sure that at every step of the chain, you're going to have some ability to protect that information, because what's on those computers could be some of the most important stuff you're working with.
Yeah, for sure. So we had a couple of audience questions roll in, which I love, by the way. Keep them coming to everybody who's watching. So Anthony asks, how reliable are KVM over IP systems these days? Years ago, I worked on a KVM over IP solution for a hospital cath lab. And once the KVM solution was installed on the hospital network, the IT security applications shut it down. There was also significant mouse lag. Wasn't practical for operating room scenarios. So just kind of asking if that has since changed now in either of your experiences.
I think part of that question speaks to the user assessment upfront that we talked about, and having that conversation with the IT department before you put it on their network. So you know what's coming, and being able to have that conversation with them upfront is probably the most critical step there. But then, like everything network based, sometimes people can have a different user experience. Just, I have fiber upload in my house here, but some days it seems like I'm still using dial-up. So it can change over time, and it's just making sure you're controlling as many factors of that as possible and working to establish the best possible system up front, so that the results you're going to get on the back end.
And then the next question is from Steven, which is similar basically, but just asking you guys to speak a little bit to network latency in the KVM over IP realm.
Some of the solutions are close to zero latency, and some things can be virtualized depending on the scenario. So some systems that live on the device itself can simulate zero latency by sort of pre-animating things, but I recently deployed a system that the latency is not noticeable, because we have a direct view of one of the PCs it's presenting, so that PC is on the video wall, and we're viewing it over the KVM so that the control room can get eyes on it, and have some access to it, and quickly fix a problem. And there's no perceivable latency. Now there are systems where latency is involved, but the benefit to a latency laden system is that you got less bandwidth. So if you're controlling a lot of PCs over a production network, and latency is not a problem because maybe you just need to get in there to get to the control panel every now and then or something on that PC, then you can choose that and save some space, some capacity on the network. But I think if anyone is experiencing latency, review the product that you're looking for and make sure it calls out zero latency. And there's a whole discussion to be had about the IT requirements. I mean, if the network won't support multicast and the system requires multicast, you're kind of dead in the water. So things like that need to be discussed. You want to review the white pages from the devices and really get a good understanding of what you're going to require. And I know, Jason, you want to get into this a little bit, but we have to be a seat at that table. We don't want IT to tell us what we're going to get. We really want to tell them what we're going to need to be successful. And if KVM-over-IP is for mission critical, it's not really a discussion. It's a statement, right? Here's what we need to make this work. So,
agreed. Absolutely agree.
Yeah. Do y'all want to kind of talk about that a little bit more about like when is the right time to be brought into the conversation with IT? I know that's like a can of worms that I end up opening on a lot of these discussions of like, okay, AV needs to be brought in like yesterday. So do you want to yeah, like how do you have that conversation with the IT department?
You need to understand the relationships of the people in the room. It's really important to understand who your direct contact is, but also who their boss is,
right?
And who's beyond that person, and not be afraid to have those conversations, and also to have trust in your team, where it's not usually just one engineer who's in the room, especially in a company the size of Diversified. We have IT specialists who will walk in and be able to talk on a network level as like a network engineer. So the IT people walk into that conversation and they understand, oh, I'm talking to another IT person here. I'm not talking to the guy who set up my projector. I'm talking to the guy who set up his IT network. And that way we can progress that conversation forward. And I always find it's helpful to have documentation as well. Make sure you have the documentation on hand. Jim said that before, where you're walking in with the white paper, you're walking in with that documentation that shows them or the client exactly what you're going to be looking for, so they know how to shape the conversation. Because if the client is also smart, they'll understand they either understand the document or it's beyond them and they need to bring it to somebody else, which is sometimes the better option.
Yeah, good points all around. So let's kind of delve into cost for a second here. I know that like that's everyone's like least favorite conversation, but what is the cost of like implementing KVM over IP versus traditional KVM? How does that compare? And do the ends justify the means? It is more expensive, yes, but like what are the long-term benefits that we're getting here?
I would say there are scenarios where it is actually not more expensive. And one of those is where you have a huge number of input to output differential. Okay, because now if I have a KVM solution and I need to access one computer by 100 for some weird reason, I only need one onboarding device to that network, right? I don't need a big matrix. I don't need to think about all these large components to do this one thing. So there are, and I've priced KVM over IP pretty close to traditional on even just like an 8 to 2 or something like that. It certainly has come down. The benefits are that you're not putting, if you have to leave the room and control these things from another room, you're not putting oddball cabling throughout a facility. You're on copper cat at this point, or even fiber. So you may need to look at the whole thing and find out pretty quickly it's cheaper, or even comparable. So I don't think it's so cost prohibitive anymore. Certainly not some of the devices I've been using. So
yeah, agreed. It's more about the system and understanding the system design and how it plays into the system. It's not something that's very easily value engineered. We're really looking at each component as part of the system and as part of a whole. And then we talked about it a little bit earlier about leaving some room for expansion and making sure that if you see it's going to be a situation where there's the possibility they're going to add in more user stations at a later date, then IP becomes much more of an attractive proposition.
For sure. What advice would you give to those in our industry who may be considering the transition to KVM over IP?
Know your use case, know what you're trying to accomplish, know what you're trying to achieve. It's very similar to as we've gone to video over IP from standard, HD based T, or even before that with copper. It's just what that situation is, what your end goal is. We didn't talk about it too much on here, but there's also the consideration of video quality and how that impacts your latency. So understanding that trade-off as well. And that will play into that decision as well.
Yeah, certainly. If you're trying to do video editing over this, you want to make sure the system is the highest quality and low latency and things like that. And you may not even be looking at KVM over IP. You may be looking at AV over IP that's masquerading as KVM over IP. So understanding use case is huge. Considering resolutions and things like that. We're in a world where some computers are 5:4, 16:10 aspect ratio is typical for Macs. My computer over there has a ultra wide monitor that would not behave with some KVM solutions. So considering all the things that you got to look at, the adapters, if you're putting a Mac mini on this, you may not have the video IO that you need, or USB maybe become C and Thunderbolt at some point. So all those things, you really want to architect the solution properly.
This is kind of jumping off of that, but are there any specific pitfalls either of you would watch out for when implementing this?
I think we got into it, but it's really, it's over IP. I don't want to overstate that, like, networking is how this is going to get around. So it's out of your control at some point, and so you really want to guide it and make sure it's successful. So
I mentioned earlier, and sorry to interrupt you, Jim. I mentioned earlier, but Jim also mentioned it not too long ago, is also knowing your video outputs and your dongles and the adapters that you're going to need up front. If you're doing a room where you're going to 2 monitors and you need 2 adapters, that's not a large cost. But if you're doing 100 stations and then you need 200 adapters, that can be a large cost hit on your project.
Or if you're in an environment that might change eventually, it's going to be a lot easier to change that within over IP, other than having to buy like complete new hardware each time.
Correct.
True. And also, the user stations are going to have USB ports. Those are not real USB ports on a lot of these, right? So understanding that you don't have true USB transport. It's a emulated human interface device, HID. So be careful when you're showing this to your customer, because they may say, oh, I've got USB there, I can stick a thumb drive in. No, that's not how that's going to work. That could be a pitfall, and I've seen it. So something worth mentioning.
Yeah, good advice for sure. Well, I know we've got just a couple more minutes here, so I wanted to use these to thank you both for hopping on here with me. I really appreciate it. But to also ask each of you, where can people connect with you after this panel? Where is easiest? I'm assuming it's LinkedIn for both of you, but just in case, where is easiest to connect with you? Jason, you first.
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just no, I don't accept all connection requests. Sorry. Or you can find me at first initial last name, so jjacoby at onediversified.com.
Okay. And Jim, what about you?
Pretty much the same. LinkedIn, Jim Trudell. I'm there. Same face. You'll see me. And jtrudell at mccansystems.com.